Money buys designer silk and the illusion of class, but it cannot buy immunity from the apex predators of the Chicago underworld. When a snobbish boutique clerk looked down her nose at the woman Dominic Moretti was quietly obsessed with, she didn't just lose a high-end sale. She signed the death warrant of an empire. This is a story of cruel whispers, gasoline, and a mafia king who burned a multi-million-dollar establishment to ashes just to protect his queen's dignity. Listen closely, because true karma wears a tailored suit and carries a gold zipper. Sophia Bennett was a woman who understood the profound, quiet language of comfort. At 28, she had built her life around the warm, sweet-scented walls of the Sugared Lily, an artisanal bakery nestled in the bustling heart of Chicago's West Loop. Sophia was soft in a world that demanded sharp edges. Her curves were generous, a physical manifestation of a life spent surrounded by rich buttercream flaky croissants and the deep, soulful joy of feeding people. She was beautiful with cascading chestnut hair and eyes the color of steeped Earl Grey tea, but it was a gentle beauty entirely at odds with the diamond-hard synthetic glamour of the city's elite. And yet the elite were her best customers. Isabella Moretti, a woman whose last name commanded hushed tones and nervous glances across the city, visited the Sugared Lily every Tuesday. Isabella adored Sophia. She adored her pastries, her infectious warm laugh, and her total lack of pretension. It was this affection that led to the invitation. Isabella was hosting the annual St. Jude's Charity Gala at the Drake Hotel, a notoriously exclusive event, and she had personally handed Sophia a heavy gold-embossed envelope. "You are coming, Sophia. I won't take no for an answer," Isabella had insisted, her dark eyes flashing with aristocratic stubbornness. "And you must wear something spectacular. Treat yourself." That was how Sophia found herself shivering on Oak Street on a biting Tuesday afternoon, staring through the floor-to-ceiling glass of L'Éclat. L'Éclat was not merely a boutique. It was a temple of haute couture. The windows displayed only 3 mannequins, each draped in avant-garde silk creations that cost more than a Midwestern mortgage. The interior was a sterile expanse of white marble, brushed gold accents, and intimidating mirrors. It smelled of ozone rare lilies and exorbitant wealth. Sophia took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her tailored wool coat. She knew her body. She loved her body. But walking into spaces designed explicitly for the impossibly thin required a specific kind of armor. She pushed the heavy brass handle, the door gliding open with a soft, expensive click. The atmosphere inside was instantly suffocating. There were no racks of clothing to browse, only solitary garments hung like museum exhibits on velvet-padded hangers. Behind a pristine glass counter stood Chloe Hastings. Chloe was a striking, angular woman who looked as though she subsisted entirely on black coffee and superiority. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe lacquered chignon, and her eyes, a pale, icy blue, flicked toward the door as Sophia entered. The subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of Chloe's jaw was the first strike. It was a look Sophia knew well, the visual calculus of a saleswoman, determining that the person walking in didn't belong. "Good afternoon." Sophia said, her voice steady, though her heart had begun a nervous, frantic rhythm against her ribs. Chloe did not immediately respond. She finished typing something on her sleek tablet, taking her time before finally raising her head. She looked Sophia up and down. It wasn't a glance, it was an autopsy. She took in Sophia's sensible leather boots, her unbranded coat, and the undeniable fullness of her hips and bust. "Can I help you?" Chloe's voice was perfectly polite, yet completely devoid of warmth. It was the tone one might use to address a lost, slightly dim-witted child. "I hope so," Sophia replied, forcing a smile. I'm attending a formal gala this weekend, and I'm looking for an evening gown. Something classic. A friend highly recommended your boutique. Chloe sighed a delicate, exasperated sound. She stepped out from behind the counter, her stilettos clicking sharply against the marble. A gala. How lovely. Yes, I was thinking perhaps emerald green or a deep sapphire. Sophia gestured toward a stunning velvet piece hanging near the window. Something with that kind of draping? Chloe didn't look at the dress. She kept her gaze fixed on Sophia. I'm going to save us both a considerable amount of time, Miss Bennett. Sophia Bennett. Miss Bennett, Leclerc caters to a very specific, very exclusive clientele. Our designers create pieces meant to drape flawlessly on a certain silhouette. Chloe's lips curved into a smile that was entirely cruel. We do not stock plus sizes. The words hung in the sterile air, loud and echoing. Two other patrons, wealthy skeletal women draped in mink, paused their browsing to look over their expressions, a mix of pity and amusement. Sophia felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. I understand you might not carry a large inventory on the floor, but surely you can order. You misunderstand me. Chloe interrupted her voice, dropping an octave, becoming a venomous hiss disguised as professional advice. I am telling you that we do not have anything that would accommodate your proportions. Not in the back. Not in a catalogue. The designers we carry refuse to compromise the integrity of their garments. I suggest you try the wholesale outlets in the suburbs, or perhaps a department store. They are much more equipped to handle bulk. Bulk! The word struck Sophia like a physical blow. The absolute malice in Chloe's eyes made it clear this wasn't about inventory. It was about exclusion. It was about making Sophia feel small by pointing out that she was large. The silence in the boutique was deafening. Sophia's eyes stung, the threat of tears burning at the edges of her vision. She wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her whole. I see. Sophia managed to whisper, her voice trembling despite her desperate attempt to keep it steady. She took a step back, blindly reaching for the door. Leave the coat check tag on the counter if you accidentally picked one up, Chloe added, turning her back dismissively. Sophia turned to flee, but before she could grasp the door handle, the atmosphere in the boutique shifted violently. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees, and the air grew impossibly thick. A man had stepped out from the private VIP fitting lounge at the back of the store. Dominic Moretti did not walk. He prowled. Standing 6'3", he possessed the kind of dark, lethal beauty that made people instinctively cross the street. His bespoke charcoal suit fit his broad shoulders, flawlessly concealing the raw, terrifying power beneath. He was the head of the Moretti family, a syndicate that controlled the port, the unions, and a vast portion of Chicago's underground wealth. But to Sophia, who only knew him as Isabella's fiercely private older brother, who occasionally came to the bakery to pick up her orders, he was simply Mr. Moretti. Dominic's jaw was clenched so tight, a muscle ticked violently beneath his olive skin. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, were fixed entirely on Chloe Hastings. He had heard every word. Miss Hastings, is it? Dominic's voice was a low, resonant baritone. It was calm, terrifyingly calm, the kind of calm that precedes a catastrophic earthquake. Chloe spun around, her haughty demeanor vanishing instantly. Her eyes widened as she recognized the man standing in her store. Anyone who moved in Chicago's high society knew the face of Dominic Moretti, even if they pretended his money was as clean as theirs. Mr. Moretti! Chloe gasped, her pale cheeks flushing with a frantic, desperate pink. I didn't realize you were still in the VIP suite. The alterations on your sister's gown will be ready in precisely. I asked you a question. Dominic interrupted, his voice slicing through her babble like a straight razor. He closed the distance between them, his presence consuming the room. Is your name Hastings? Yes, sir. Chloe shrunk back against the glass counter, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge. Dominic didn't look at the other patrons who were now scrambling toward the exit, terrified of the sudden, lethal tension. He slowly turned his head to look at Sophia. When his eyes met hers, the freezing darkness in them softened just a fraction. He saw the unshed tears in her eyes, the rigid set of her shoulders, the deep, agonizing flush of her humiliation. Something ancient and violent snapped inside his chest. For months, Dominic had been a silent observer of Sophia Bennett. He went to her bakery not just for his sister, but because watching Sophia work, watching her flour-dusted hands, her bright, genuine smiles, the way she hummed to herself, was the only peace he found in his blood-soaked world. He had kept his distance, knowing his world was too dark for a woman made of sugar and light. But seeing her standing here, broken down by a petty, worthless clerk, that was unacceptable. Dominic turned his gaze back to Chloe. Apologize. Chloe blinked, stunned. Excuse me. Apologize to Miss Bennett, Dominic said softly, stepping closer. Now, Mr. Moretti, I was merely explaining store policy. We simply do not cater to... Dominic's hand shot out. He didn't touch her, but he slammed his palm flat against the glass counter, the sheer force of the impact causing the thick glass to crack violently down the center. The sound was like a gunshot. Chloe shrieked, jumping back. I do not care about your policy, Dominic whispered, his face inches from hers. You insulted a woman who possesses more grace in her little finger than you, and this entire pathetic mausoleum combined. You will look at her, and you will apologize for your sheer, unadulterated ignorance. Trembling violently, Chloe looked at Sophia. I apologize. I'm sorry. Sophia stood frozen, completely overwhelmed by the sudden explosion of violence and defense. It's fine, she whispered, just wanting to escape. I'm leaving. You are not leaving empty-handed, Dominic said, his tone instantly shifting from lethal to gentle as he addressed Sophia. He reached onto a nearby display table and picked up a breathtaking hand-painted silk scarf, the price tag dangling heavily from the hem. It was priced at $3,000. He draped it delicately around Sophia's shoulders. He then pulled a sleek black titanium card from his inner pocket and tossed it onto the cracked glass counter. Ring it up, Hastings, and keep the card. You're going to need it to pay for the repairs to your counter. Without waiting for a response, Dominic placed a warm, heavy hand on the small of Sophia's back, guiding her out of the boutique and into the freezing Chicago air. He walked her to his waiting armored Maybach. His driver, a stoic man named Lorenzo, immediately opened the door. Get in, Sophia, Dominic said softly. You're freezing. She climbed into the warm, leather-scented interior, still clutching the silk scarf. Dominic slid in beside her. The car pulled away from Oak Street smoothly. You didn't have to do that, Sophia murmured, staring at her hands. But... Thank you. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Dominic turned his body toward her. The street lights flickered over his sharp profile. You have nothing to be embarrassed about, Sophia. That woman is a parasite. She peddles fabric to shallow people and thinks it makes her royalty. You create joy. You build things with your hands. You are worth 10,000 of her. Sophia looked up, her heart doing a strange, fluttering acrobatics act at the raw intensity in his eyes. He wasn't just comforting her. He meant it as a statement of absolute fact. He He dropped her off at her apartment above the bakery, waiting until she was safely inside with the deadbolt thrown. As soon as he heard the lock click, the warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness. He returned to the Maybach. "Where to, boss?" Lorenzo asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Back to the office. Call the lieutenants," Dominic commanded, pulling out his encrypted phone. 4 hours later, Dominic stood in the shadows of an alleyway directly across from L'Eclat. The street was deserted, the luxury boutiques locked up tight behind heavy iron grills. Beside him stood Lorenzo and 3 other men dressed in dark, unassuming clothing. "I did the digging you asked for," Lorenzo murmured, handing Dominic a tablet. "You were right to trust your gut. The owner of the boutique, Richard Harrington, he's not just selling overpriced dresses. He's been washing cash through the inventory books for the Costello family for the last 3 years. A dark, terrifying smile curved Dominic's lips. It was almost poetic. The boutique wasn't just a place where his Sophia was humiliated. It was a financial artery for his greatest rivals. Destroying it wouldn't just be petty vengeance, it would be a strategic strike. A message. "Is the building empty?" Dominic asked. "Yes, boss. Night watchman was paid off. He's at a diner 3 miles away. Cameras have been looped. The street is blind." Dominic nodded. He pulled a pair of black leather gloves from his pocket and slipped them on the leather, creaking softly in the quiet night. "Take out the front glass. Quietly. Leave the inventory exactly where it is." His men moved with practiced efficiency. A diamond-tipped glass cutter, a heavy suction cup, and within minutes, the massive front window of L'Eclat was removed, creating a gaping dark maw into the pristine white interior. Dominic stepped inside. The air still smelled of ozone and rare lilies. It smelled of Chloe Hastings's sneer. "Gasoline," Dominic ordered quietly. Lorenzo and another man carried in heavy red jerry cans. They moved methodically, soaking the plush velvet carpets, splashing the liquid over the pristine white marble, and dousing the imported silk gowns hanging on their velvet hangers. The heavy noxious scent of high-octane fuel quickly overpowered the expensive perfumes. When they were finished, the men stepped back out into the freezing street, leaving Dominic standing alone in the center of the drenched boutique. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a heavy gold Zippo lighter. He flipped the lid open with a sharp clink. His thumb rolled over the flint. A bright orange flame sprang to life, illuminating the harsh angles of his face in the darkness. He looked at the spot where Sophia had stood, shrinking into herself, humiliated by a woman who amounted to nothing more than a pawn in a larger, dirtier game. "No one makes her feel small," Dominic whispered to the empty room. "No one." He tossed the lighter. It arced gracefully through the air, tumbling end over end before landing on the gasoline-soaked carpet. The ignition was instantaneous. A brilliant, roaring wall of blue and orange fire erupted, racing across the floor and climbing the walls with terrifying speed. The heat was immediate and oppressive. The silk dresses caught fire, disintegrating into black ash in seconds. Dominic turned his back on the inferno and walked out of the shattered window, his face impassive as the glow of the flames danced across his dark eyes. "Let's go," he told Lorenzo. "Harrington and the Costellos will get the message by morning." The morning sky over Chicago was the color of bruised iron. Inside the sugared lily, it was a warm, golden haven. Sophia was up at 4 a.m., her hands deep in a massive stainless steel bowl of brioche dough. The rhythmic kneading was her meditation, a way to process the humiliation of the previous afternoon. She had spent half the night staring at the $3,000 silk scarf draped over her chair, her mind replaying Dominic Moretti's voice, the dangerous crack of the glass, and the protective heat in his eyes. She wiped her forehead with the back of her flowery arm and reached out to turn up the volume on the small television perched on top of the commercial refrigerator. The morning news anchor's voice filled the kitchen. Breaking news out of the Gold Coast this morning. A devastating fire completely gutted the luxury boutique Leclerc on Oak Street late last night. Fire officials are calling the blaze highly suspicious, noting the speed at which the fire consumed the property. Thankfully, the building was empty, and no injuries have been reported. The boutique's owner, Richard Harrington, has declined to comment. Sophia froze. The dough in her hands slipped back into the bowl with a heavy thud. She turned slowly, staring at the screen. The footage showed a charred, blackened shell where the pristine white marble temple had stood just yesterday. Smoke was still billowing from the shattered front window. The mannequins were melted plastic husks. A cold dread pooled in her stomach, followed immediately by a sharp, terrifying realization. No. She thought her breath catching. It's a coincidence, an electrical fire. It has to be. But she remembered the look in Dominic's eyes when he stared down the clerk, the absolute, unyielding authority. He was Isabella's brother, yes, but he was also a Moretti. Sophia wasn't naive. She read the papers. She knew the whispers about the Moretti family, the alleged racketeering, the unsolved disappearances, the brutal control over the city's underbelly. She had always pushed those rumors away, focusing on the polite, quiet man who bought lemon tarts for his sister. The bell above the bakery door chimed cheerfully, shattering her racing thoughts. Sophia wiped her hands hastily on her apron and walked out of the back kitchen into the storefront. Standing in the middle of the room, looking entirely out of place, amidst the pastel pink walls and display cases of macarons, was Dominic Moretti. He was wearing a black tailored overcoat over a dark suit, his hands tucked into his pockets. He looked exactly as he had the day before, save for a faint, smoky scent that clung to his clothes, a smell that made the blood roar in Sophia's ears. "Good morning, Sophia," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Moretti." She managed to say, her voice slightly breathless. She stayed behind the safety of the display counter. "We aren't open for another hour." "I know, but I wanted to make sure you were all right after yesterday." He walked closer to the counter, leaning forward slightly. "And I thought perhaps I could get a coffee." Sophia moved automatically to the espresso machine. The familiar motions grounded her. She ground the beans, tamped them, and pulled a double shot. As the dark liquid poured into the small cup, she couldn't stop herself. "Did you see the news this morning?" she asked, keeping her back to him. "I don't watch the news," Dominic replied smoothly. "It's mostly fiction." "The boutique," Sophia said, turning around and sliding the saucer across the counter. "The one we were at yesterday. It burned down last night. Completely gutted." Dominic picked up the small cup, taking a sip of the bitter espresso. His dark eyes locked onto hers over the rim of the cup. He didn't look surprised. He didn't offer fake sympathy. He just watched her. "Old wiring, I imagine," he said softly. "Those historical buildings on Oak Street are fire hazards. It's a tragedy, but at least the cancer inside the building was eradicated." Sophia gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. "Mr. Moretti. Dominic, what did you do?" He set the cup down. The playful, gentle demeanor he usually maintained in her bakery slipped away, revealing the apex predator beneath. He stepped around the counter, invading her space, towering over her. Sophia didn't step back. She tilted her chin up, meeting his gaze. "I protected what is mine to protect," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "I am not yours to protect." Sophia fired back, though her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm. "And burning down a building because a clerk insulted me, that's insane. That's a crime." The clerk was a symptom. The owner, Harrington, was laundering millions for the Costello family men who traffic in things far worse than insults. Dominic stated plainly, deciding in that moment not to lie to her. He wanted her to see him, all of him. The fire served two purposes, Sophia. It crippled my enemies financially, and it ensured that a place that caused you pain no longer exists. I consider it a highly productive Tuesday night. Sophia stared at him, horrified, but intensely captivated. The sheer audacity of it, the terrifying reality that this man had incinerated a multi-million-dollar business partly because a woman made her cry. "You're a monster," she whispered, though the word lacked venom. Dominic reached out his large, warm hand, gently cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of flour. "I am whatever I need to be to keep the world from breaking you, Sophia. The people in my world are ruthless. But you—" He paused, his eyes dropping to her lips before meeting her gaze again. "You are good. And I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone make you feel less than you are." Before Sophia could respond, the bakery door burst open. A man stood in the threshold, his chest heaving, his expensive suit disheveled. It was Richard Harrington, the owner of L'Eclat. He looked frantic, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Dominic. "You son of a bitch!" Harrington screamed, pulling a silver revolver from his coat pocket and pointing it directly at Dominic's chest. "The Costellos are going to skin me alive! You ruined everything." Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around fully. He simply stepped sideways smoothly, placing his large body completely between Harrington's gun and Sophia. "Lorenzo," Dominic said calmly. From the street outside, Lorenzo and another guard moved with terrifying speed. Before Harrington could even steady the shaking gun, Lorenzo had crossed the threshold, striking Harrington in the back of the knee and wrenching the weapon from his grasp with a sickening crunch of bone. Harrington collapsed to the floor of the bakery, screaming in pain. Sophia covered her mouth, a muffled gasp escaping her lips. Dominic looked down at the weeping, broken man on her pristine, flour-dusted floor. Then he looked back at Sophia, his eyes dark and unapologetic. "I apologize for the mess in your bakery, mia dolcezza," Dominic said softly, the Italian endearment slipping out naturally. "But it seems the fiction of the news has come to find us." The line between Sophia's sweet, quiet life and Dominic's violent, ash-choked world had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. And as she looked at the broad back of the man who had set the city on fire for her, she realized she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to rebuild the wall between them. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the sweet scent of vanilla and brioche, creating a jarring, nauseating contrast. Richard Harrington whimpered on the pristine black and white checkered floor of the sugared lily clutching his shattered knee. Dominic didn't even look at the man. He kept his dark, intense gaze locked on Sophia, reading the shock that rippled through her. With a subtle flick of his wrist, he signaled Lorenzo. "Get him out of here." Dominic ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Take him to the warehouse on Rush Street. Ensure he understands the cost of drawing a weapon in the presence of a civilian. Then hand him over to the Costellos. Let them deal with their own trash." Lorenzo and the second guard hauled the sobbing boutique owner up by his arms, dragging him out the back door and into the waiting armored SUV. Within seconds, the bakery was silent again, save for the hum of the commercial refrigerators. Sophia stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "I will have a cleaning crew here in 10 minutes to sanitize the floor," Dominic said, gently taking a step toward her. "And a detail of my men will be stationed across the street 24 hours a day. I don't want your men outside my bakery." Sophia snapped the shock, finally giving way to a surge of adrenaline and anger. I bake bread. Dominic. I make wedding cakes. I don't need armed guards, and I certainly don't need mobsters bleeding on my floor. You need them now, Dominic replied, his tone hardening, just enough to broker no argument. Harrington was a desperate fool, but Carmine Costello is not. Carmine is a butcher. By burning Leclas, I cut off a major financial artery for his operation. He will retaliate. And since Harrington just proved that my presence here is no longer a secret, you are a target. Because of you, she cried, throwing her flour-dusted hands up. Yes, because of me. Dominic admitted, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. I made a choice, Sophia. I chose your dignity over my anonymity. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. But you will let me protect you, because if Carmine Costello touches one hair on your head, the fire on Oak Street will look like a matchstick compared to what I will do to this city. His intensity was absolute. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, carved in stone. Sophia swallowed hard, looking away from his piercing gaze. She was furious, terrified, and yet deep down, in a place she dared not acknowledge, she felt a profound, intoxicating safety. The next 3 days passed in a blur of flour sugar and hypervigilance. True to his word, 2 unassuming men in a black sedan were parked outside the Sugared Lily around the clock. Isabella still visited, blissfully ignorant of the blood spilled on the bakery floor, chattering excitedly about the upcoming St. Jude's Gala at the Drake Hotel. You are still coming, right? Isabella asked on Friday afternoon, sipping a macchiato. Dominic told me about the incident at the boutique. I am so terribly sorry, Sophia. Chloe Hastings is a wretched social climber. But you must come to the gala. I don't have a dress, Isabella, Sophia replied, wiping down the espresso machine. And frankly, I don't think I belong in that world. Nonsense, Isabella huffed. Dominic handled the dress situation. Didn't he tell you? Before Sophia could ask what she meant, a heavy knock sounded at the back delivery door. One of Dominic's guards stepped inside, carrying a massive, sleek black garment bag, bearing the gold crest of a highly exclusive private atelier in Milan, not a boutique, but a master tailor who only worked by private commission. The guard handed the box to Sophia with a respectful nod and exited. Isabella clapped her hands. Open it. Sophia unzipped the bag with trembling fingers. Inside, protected by layers of acid-free tissue paper, was a gown that defied description. It was a deep midnight sapphire, the exact color she had told Chloe Hastings she wanted. But this was no standard designer piece. It was custom-draped silk velvet, designed specifically to celebrate a woman's curves, not hide them. The bodice was structured with hidden corsetry to support and lift, flowing down into a sweeping skirt that moved like liquid water. Pinned to the garment bag was a thick, cream-colored card with a handwritten note in sharp, elegant script. True beauty requires no apology. Wear it and let them stare. D. Sophia traced the heavy silk with her fingertips, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was the most exquisite thing she had ever seen. Dominic hadn't just replaced the dress. He had listened to her. He had remembered the exact shade, the exact cut she desired. He's a complicated man, Isabella said softly, watching Sophia's reaction. But when my brother decides something is precious to him, he protects it with his life. Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill rolling off Lake Michigan. The Drake Hotel stood like a limestone fortress at the top of the magnificent mile, its grand entrance illuminated by the flashing bulbs of paparazzi and the headlights of luxury cars. Sophia stepped out of Lorenzo's town car, her breath catching in her throat. The midnight sapphire gown fit her like a second skin, the rich velvet contrasting beautifully with her porcelain skin and chestnut hair, which was swept up in a loose, elegant chignon. She wore no jewelry, save for a pair of simple pearl drop earrings her mother had given her. She didn't need diamonds. The dress commanded the room entirely on its own. As she walked into the opulent gold-leafed lobby, heads turned, not with the cruel, calculating sneers of Oak Street, but with genuine, unadulterated awe. She was a vision of classic old-world glamour. Dominic was waiting for her at the base of the grand staircase leading to the Gold Coast room. He wore a bespoke black tuxedo that accentuated his broad, lethal frame. The moment his eyes landed on her, the rest of the crowded, noisy lobby ceased to exist. He stopped breathing. The cold, calculated Mafia boss vanished, leaving only a man utterly captivated by the woman walking toward him. "Sophia," he murmured as she reached the bottom step. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles before bringing her hand to his lips. "You eclipse every light in this city." A blush spread across her cheeks. "Thank you. And thank you for the dress, Dominic. It's a masterpiece." "The dress is merely the frame," he replied smoothly, offering her his arm. "Shall we—" The Gold Coast room was a sea of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and Chicago's elite. Politicians, hedge fund managers, and socialites mingled entirely unaware of the dark currents swirling beneath the surface of the room. Dominic kept Sophia close his hand, resting securely on the small of her back. He introduced her to senators and businessmen, not as a baker, but as his honored guest. He forced the city's royalty to look her in the eye and treat her with absolute respect. For 2 hours it was perfect. They danced, they laughed, and Sophia felt a soaring, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, this man could exist in the light. Then the atmosphere shifted. Dominic went still, his hand tightening imperceptibly on her waist. Sophia followed his gaze toward the heavy mahogany double doors of the ballroom. A man had just entered. He was older, in his late 60s, wearing a flashy silver suit. His face was deeply lined, and his eyes were flat and dead. Flanking him were 4 massive men whose tuxedos bulged unnaturally at the armpits. "Carmine." Dominic breathed the word a deadly hiss. "The Costello boss," Sophia whispered, panic instantly flaring in her chest. "Yes, he wasn't on the guest list. He bought his way in." Dominic's eyes scanned the room instantly, doing tactical math. He had 4 men stationed outside the ballroom, and Lorenzo was near the bandstand. It wasn't enough. "Sophia, listen to me very carefully. You are going to walk to the kitchens. Do not run. Do not look back. My man, Rossi, is by the service elevators. He will get you out." "I'm not leaving you here," she protested, gripping his arm. "You are leaving," Dominic commanded, his voice dropping into that terrifying, absolute authority. "Carmine is looking right at us. He knows who you are." Before Sophia could argue, the sharp, deafening crack of a gunshot echoed over the string quartet. The ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. Women screamed, men shouted, and the elite of Chicago scrambled like terrified cattle as glass shattered from the chandeliers above. Carmine Costello had not come to talk. He had come to make a public statement. Dominic grabbed Sophia by the waist, practically throwing her to the ground behind a massive overturned banquet table as another volley of gunfire tore through the room. Silk tablecloths and fine china rained down around them. "Stay down!" Dominic roared over the din. He reached into the inner lining of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a matte black Glock 19. Sophia covered her ears, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The beautiful opulent gala had transformed into a war zone in a matter of seconds. The heavy scent of gunpowder replaced the expensive perfumes. "Dominic, they're everywhere!" Sophia cried out, peering through a gap in the overturned tables. Two of Carmine's men were advancing through the panicked crowd, firing indiscriminately, their eyes locked on the spot where Dominic and Sophia had taken cover. Dominic didn't hesitate. He popped up from behind the table, his aim terrifyingly steady. Two sharp cracks rang from his weapon, and both of the advancing hitmen dropped to the marble floor, neutralized instantly. "Move!" Dominic yelled, hauling Sophia to her feet. He kept his body between her and the shooters, returning fire as he dragged her toward the heavy velvet curtains lining the east wall. They burst through the curtains, stumbling into a narrow, dimly lit service hallway used by the catering staff. Lorenzo was already there, blood pouring from a graze on his shoulder, his own weapon drawn. "They blocked the main exits, boss," Lorenzo panted. "Carmine brought at least a dozen men. They want to trap you in the hotel." "The kitchens," Dominic ordered, pushing Sophia behind him. "We take the freight elevator down to the loading dock." They sprinted down the narrow corridor, the sounds of screaming and gunfire echoing through the walls. Sophia's heels slowed her down, and without a second thought she kicked them off, running barefoot on the cold concrete. They burst into the massive industrial kitchen of the Drake. Chefs and waitstaff were cowering under stainless steel prep tables. Suddenly the doors at the far end of the kitchen kicked open. 3 more of Costello's men stormed in assault rifles raised. "Get down!" Lorenzo yelled, tackling Sophia behind a massive industrial walk-in freezer, just as a hail of bullets shredded the stainless steel counters, sending a shower of sparks and metal shrapnel into the air. Dominic rolled behind a central prep island, returning fire with lethal precision. But they were pinned down. The firepower was overwhelming. Sophia huddled against the freezing metal door of the walk-in, the velvet of her beautiful dress soaked in water from a shattered pipe. She looked at Dominic, pinned down behind the counter bullets, tearing the kitchen apart around him. He had burned down a building to protect her pride, and now his empire and his life were crumbling because of it. As one of the hitmen advanced, reloading his weapon, Sophia saw a heavy cast-iron skillet resting on a low shelf just inches from her hand. She wasn't a mobster. She was a baker. But Dominic Moretti was the first man who had ever truly seen her, the first man who had ever fought for her. As the hitman stepped past the freezer, aiming his rifle at the island where Dominic was hiding, Sophia didn't think. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet with both hands, let out a primal scream, and swung it with all the strength she possessed, bringing the heavy metal down squarely onto the back of the hitman's skull. The man collapsed instantly, his rifle clattering across the wet tile. Dominic's head whipped around his eyes, widening in pure shock as he looked at Sophia, barefoot, breathing heavily, holding a bloody frying pan over an unconscious mobster. The shock lasted only a second. Dominic surged upward, firing 2 final shots that took out the remaining 2 men at the door. Silence descended on the ruined kitchen, save for the hiss of the broken water pipe. Dominic walked slowly toward Sophia. He looked down at the unconscious hitman, then back up to her. He dropped his gun, grabbed the lapels of her ruined velvet dress, and pulled her flush against his chest, crashing his mouth down onto hers. It was a kiss born of adrenaline, gunpowder, and raw, desperate relief. Sophia dropped the skillet, wrapping her arms around his neck, kissing him back with an equal, terrifying ferocity. The velvet trap had snapped shut, and she realized with absolute certainty that she no longer wanted to escape. The kiss ended only when the wail of police sirens pierced the thick, gun-smoke-filled air of the Drake Hotel kitchen. Dominic pulled back his chest, heaving his dark eyes, scanning Sophia's face to ensure she was truly unharmed. He wiped a streak of soot from her cheek with a trembling thumb, the first time she had ever seen the Mafia King physically shake. "We need to move, boss," Lorenzo grunted, applying pressure to his bleeding shoulder. The CPD will lock this perimeter down in 2 minutes. If we get caught in the dragnet, Carmine wins the narrative. Dominic nodded sharply, the cold tactical leader returning instantly. He grabbed Sophia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They navigated the maze of the lower loading docks, slipping into a nondescript, heavily armored black SUV that Lorenzo had staged for emergencies. The vehicle peeled out into the freezing Chicago night, vanishing into the labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive, just as the first wave of police cruisers swarmed the hotel. They drove in silence to a highly secure safe house, tucked away in the dense, wooded ravines of Highland Park. The estate was a fortress of stone and glass, invisible from the main road. Once inside, the adrenaline began to crash. Sophia sank into a plush leather sofa, her barefoot toes curling into the Persian rug, shivering violently in her damp, ruined velvet gown. Dominic immediately stripped off his tuxedo jacket, draping it over her shoulders before turning to Lorenzo to inspect the bullet graze. "It's superficial," Dominic muttered, applying a pressure bandage from a tactical medical kit. But they knew exactly where we were sitting. They knew the layout of my detail. Carmine Costello isn't a ghost. He couldn't bypass the Drake's security without an open door. An inside man. Lorenzo grimaced, wincing as the bandage was pulled tight. The private security firm contracted for the gala. They were recommended by Alderman Nathaniel Reed. Dominic froze. The name hung in the air like a poisoned blade. Alderman Nathaniel Reed was a staple in Chicago politics, a man whose campaigns the Moretti family had funded for 2 decades. More than that, Reed had been a confidant to Dominic's late father. "Reed sold us out to the Costellos," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "Carmine must have offered him the port development contracts." Before Dominic could issue the order to hunt the alderman down, his encrypted satellite phone buzzed. The caller ID was a string of zeros. Dominic answered on speaker. "Carmine, it was a valiant effort, Dominic." The raspy, age-worn voice of Carmine Costello crackled through the speaker. "But you're a young dog. You let your emotions dictate your business, burning a $5 million boutique over a baker sloppy." "You missed Carmine," Dominic replied, his voice absolute ice. "And now you have a war you cannot win." "I didn't miss. I just changed targets in the chaos," Carmine countered with a wet, humorless chuckle. "My men couldn't get to you in the kitchen, so they grabbed the next best thing from the ballroom." A muffled, terrified whimper sounded over the line. Sophia's blood ran cold. She recognized that sound. "Isabella," she breathed. Dominic's jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to shatter. "If you touch one hair on my sister's head, I will strip the flesh from your bones while you breathe." "Save the poetry," Carmine snapped. "The abandoned Hammond steel mill just over the Indiana border. Tomorrow night. Midnight. You come alone. You sign over the deed to the Southside ports, and you surrender yourself. If you bring a small army, or if you don't show, I send Isabella back to you in pieces. Do we have a deal?" "I'll be there," Dominic said. The line went dead. Dominic stared at the phone, the silence in the safe house, deafening. He had built his empire to protect his family, to insulate Isabella from the blood that stained his hands. Now his actions had placed her directly in the jaws of a monster. He turned to Lorenzo. "Gather every loyal man we have. But they don't go to the mill. They go to the Costello compound in Oak Brook. I want a siege." "And you?" Sophia asked, standing up, the oversized tuxedo jacket slipping off her shoulder. "You're just going to walk into a trap." "I have no choice, Sophia," Dominic said, gently, walking over and framing her face with his large hands. "He has my sister. Then I am going with you," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady. "Absolutely not." "Dominic, listen to me," Sophia insisted, her eyes flashing with a fierce, undeniable fire. Carmine wants to humiliate you. He wants you broken. If you walk in there alone, he'll kill you the second you sign those papers. But he doesn't care about me. He thinks I'm a weakness. Let me be the distraction. I will not risk you. I already started a war because a woman made you cry. What do you think I'll do if Carmine points a gun at you? You'll do what you do best, Sophia whispered, pressing her forehead against his chest. You'll survive. We'll survive. I knocked out a hitman with a skillet tonight, Dominic. Do not sideline me now. The Hammond steel mill was a decaying monument to a bygone industrial era. Rusted catwalks crisscrossed the cavernous open-air warehouse, groaning under the bitter winter wind blowing off Lake Michigan. Dominic walked through the massive rusted front gates exactly at midnight. True to his word, he appeared alone, his hands empty, the portfolio containing the port deeds tucked under his arm. Carmine Costello stood in the center of the main floor, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. Tied to a metal chair behind him was Isabella, her gala dress, torn, her face bruised but defiant. I'm surprised you actually showed, kid, Carmine sneered, stepping forward. I thought you'd send an army. The army is currently surrounding your estate in Oak Brook, Dominic said smoothly, stopping 20 paces away. Your wife and your youngest daughter are there, aren't they, Carmine? My men have orders to burn it to the ground if I don't call them in 10 minutes. Carmine's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. A bluff. You don't kill women. You're right, I don't, Dominic agreed. But Lorenzo does. Carmine narrowed his eyes. The deeds. Toss them over. Dominic threw the leather portfolio onto the dirt between them. One of Carmine's men retrieved it, verifying the signatures with a flashlight. He nodded to his boss. Good, Carmine said, raising his revolver and pointing it squarely at Dominic's chest. Now say goodbye, Moretti. Wait. The voice echoed from the shadowed upper catwalk. Carmine and his men jerked their heads upward. Standing on the rusted grating, spotlighted by the moonlight filtering through the broken roof, was Sophia. She had shed the ruined ball gown and wore a dark tactical sweater and cargo pants borrowed from the safe house. In her hands, she held a heavy red jerry can. The baker! Carmine laughed incredulously. What are you going to do, sweetheart? Throw a croissant at me? No, Sophia yelled down her voice, trembling but carrying across the cavernous space. But I learned a lot about fire this week. She tipped the jerry can, pouring a massive cascade of gasoline down onto the rusted machinery and the dirt floor, creating a puddle that rapidly spread toward where Carmine's men were standing. Shoot her! Carmine roared. But the distraction was all Dominic needed. The moment the gunmen raised their weapons toward the catwalk, Dominic moved with explosive speed. He drew a concealed blade from his sleeve, throwing it with lethal precision into the throat of the man guarding Isabella. He lunged forward, grabbing the falling man's assault rifle before it hit the ground. In the span of 3 seconds, the steel mill erupted into chaos. Dominic fired, taking down 2 more of Carmine's men as he sprinted toward his sister. From her perch, Sophia pulled Dominic's gold Zippo lighter from her pocket, the very same lighter he had used at the boutique. She struck the flint and dropped it into the gasoline below. A wall of fire roared to life, separating Carmine from the exit and instantly incinerating the remaining henchmen who were caught in the blast radius. Carmine stumbled backward, coughing as the thick black smoke filled the air. He raised his revolver blindly through the flames, aiming at Dominic, who was frantically cutting Isabella's bonds. Before Carmine could pull the trigger, a single suppressed gunshot echoed from a hidden vantage point high in the rafters. Carmine Costello's eyes went wide, a neat red hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He collapsed onto the dirt, lifeless. Lorenzo lowered his sniper rifle from the shadows above. He had never gone to Oak Brook. Dominic hauled Isabella to her feet, shielding her from the heat as he looked up through the smoke to the catwalk. Sophia was already running down the rusted iron stairs. When she reached the bottom, Dominic dropped the rifle and caught her in his arms, burying his face in her neck. "You are utterly terrifying," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "I had a good teacher," she whispered, clinging to him as the flames of the Costello Empire burned to ash around them. 6 months later, the sugared lily smelled of warm vanilla cinnamon and fresh espresso. It was a Saturday morning, and the bakery was packed. Behind the counter, Sophia expertly frosted a 3-tiered wedding cake, her movements fluid and joyful. The door chimed, and Dominic walked in. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. He no longer parked armored SUVs out front. The war was over. Carmine was dead, Alderman Reed was serving a federal prison sentence, and the Moretti family held undisputed quiet control. Dominic leaned over the counter, kissing the powdered sugar off Sophia's cheek. "How is the city's most ruthless baker today?" he murmured. Sophia smiled, glancing at the television in the corner. A daytime talk show was playing, featuring a segment on budget makeup. Applying foundation on the screen, looking miserable in a polyester uniform, was Chloe Hastings. "Life is perfectly sweet," Sophia said, handing Dominic a fresh brioche. "Just exactly as it should be. If you loved this story of vengeance, loyalty, and a mafia king who would burn the world down for the woman he loves, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support, and share this video with anyone who craves high-stakes romance and thrilling drama. The underworld is full of secrets, and we have so many more gripping stories to tell. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling upload. Your support helps us bring these stories to life